I think it's about time for part 2 of the video studio conversion series. If you watch part 1, you'll know that I'm converting my living room into a video studio, so that the Wight Vision community group has a permanent space where they can shoot videos like vlogs and interviews. I've got big ideas but a small budget, so I'll be aiming to get the biggest bang for my buck. To help the process along, I've made 2 drawings, one showing how the room looks now, a before view, and another showing how the room will look once the conversion is complete. To maximise the depth in the room, I'm going to be using the bay window area as the main focal point of the studio. And if I can raise enough funds, this is what I'd like to do with this bay window area. Firstly, I'd like to hang a dark grey faux velvet blackout curtain on the curtain rail. This will create a neutral coloured background that can be tinted using different coloured background lights. And it also has good acoustic properties because it will soak up sound pretty effectively to prevent the person speaking from sounding echoey. I'm going to put a desk and a chair in there too, in front of the curtain, and use 3-point lighting. A main light on the left to provide the main source of illumination, a fill light on the right hand side to fill in some of the shadows cast by the main light, and lastly a brightly coloured accent light that sits on the floor behind the talent to help separate them from the curtain behind them. To find the right curtain, chair and lights, it took a huge amount of research, but I think it was worthwhile because I came up with some great solutions. I'll share with you my thought process and the fruits of my research. Let's get the curtain out of the way with first, because researching that was painfully boring. I had to find someone who would make a large, custom-sized blackout curtain in dark grey faux velvet for a reasonable amount of money. Some quotes I received were for around £1,000, which seemed bizarrely expensive. But finally I found a company called Terry's Fabrics, who would make it for a more affordable sum. I haven't ordered it yet because I haven't got the money, but the research has now been done, which takes me a step closer to my goal. Next, I needed to research a desk chair. Again, this was a pretty dull experience. I wanted to find a chair that was simple and attractive, but also comfortable. I must have looked at a few hundred chairs before I finally found one at IKEA that ticked all the boxes. I already have a desk. It's a simple black and white thing that was cheap, but it looks fine and it fits the space, so we've got that part of the studio sorted. And now the research started to get a bit more interesting, because next on the list was lighting. Firstly, I needed a main light to provide the primary source of illumination within the studio. I've used lights before and had a pretty good idea of what it was that I wanted. I wanted an LED light panel because they're thin, affordable, and they don't get too hot. It seemed the most logical solution, considering I'm going to be working in a pretty small space. I wanted some kind of diffusion over the panel to soften the light and the shadows that it cast to create a more professional look. And lastly, I wanted a light that had barn doors as an accessory, so I could control the way the light spilled out from the panel. I didn't want it spilling out in a wide arc. I wanted it directed and controlled to ensure the coloured background light wasn't completely bleached out by the brighter foreground light. Unfortunately, the type of light that I wanted doesn't actually exist. There is no LED panel light that has diffusion and barn doors. Why? I have no idea. It seems like something that should exist, but there simply isn't a light like that on the market, and so I did the best that I could in the circumstances. At first I considered the newer rollable light panel. It was nice and big and had diffusion in the form of a white fabric screen that velcroed to the front. It was also very light and portable, which I liked, but there was no barn door accessory for this panel, or any simple way to control the way the light spilled out. Next I considered the Pixar Pro Glow Pad. This had built-in diffusion of a sort, because the front panel was opaque. But again, they didn't make barn doors for this particular light. Eventually, I stumbled upon the Nanlite Compact 100. Like the Glow Pad, it had built-in diffusion in the form of an opaque front panel that cast a nice soft light. You couldn't buy barn doors for this panel, but you could buy something called a fabric grid, that's also known as an egg crate. This is a mesh screen that attaches to the front of the panel and prevents the light from spilling out in a wide arc. It directs the light forward in a fairly narrow beam. This wasn't exactly what I'd envisioned, because it didn't allow much in the way of shaping the light, but it was close enough. It should at least avoid bleaching out the coloured background light, and my eyeballs were beginning to shrivel up like raisins at this point, so that's the main light that I settled upon. The secondary light that was needed to fill in the shadows cast by the main light I already had. It was a basic bicolour LED panel. It was small, old, and the light was pretty harsh, but I discovered that if I taped a sheet of paper to the front, it diffused the light fairly well. Lastly, I needed a colourful accent light to sit on the floor at the back of the studio and shine upwards to separate the talent from the background curtain. This was a research nightmare. I started searching for LED strip lights, and there are bazillions of them, with different LEDs, wattages, features, build qualities and prices. I started off looking at the type that you buy on rolls that you have to assemble yourself. Then I looked at neon-style strips that were slightly softer and more attractive. Then I looked into LED corner lights that I supposed you could lay flat on the floor to achieve what I wanted. But I wasn't sure if any of these LED lights would be bright enough, and so I looked into fluorescent tubes that you could buy gel filters for to colour them. But I wondered if they might be too bright. Each system had its own pros and cons, and I couldn't tell for sure which would look best without trying them all out. But I simply can't afford to try them all out. And so I continued on with my research, and eventually I settled upon quite an unusual solution. It's an LED baton light that has both colour control and is dimmable. The colour control isn't RGB that allows millions of different colours. It just switches the light between warm white, medium white and cool white. I preferred this type of LED light because it's much brighter than the RGB type LEDs that allow millions of different colours. So I knew it would be bright enough, and because it was dimmable, I could ensure that it wouldn't be too bright. Regarding the colour of the light, I could achieve whatever colour I wanted by buying gel filters. Gel filters are sheets of coloured film that can be attached to a light to control the colour that it emits. They're not expensive, so it wouldn't cost a lot to buy a few different colours. It took a long time to research this light, but I felt pretty confident about the solution that I'd come up with, even if it was still only theoretical at this point. In fact, I feel pretty good about all the items that I've researched for this studio, and I now feel ready to move on to the next stage of this project, which involves trying to raise the money needed to buy all this stuff. I'll talk about that in the next episode of this series. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.